Welcome back, and listen carefully, because this story begins just minutes before a billionaire's wedding, in a mansion filled with music, flowers, and secrets no one was supposed to uncover. Everything looked perfect. The guests were seated. The bride was ready. And the groom, one of the most powerful men in the city, believed he was about to start the happiest chapter of his life. But then, a voice he wasn't supposed to notice stopped him cold. A black maid. Quiet. Invisible. Standing in the hallway, her hands shaking, her voice barely steady. She looked at him and said 4 words that would change everything. "Don't open that door." At first, it sounded ridiculous. Why would a maid interfere in a billionaire's wedding? What could possibly be behind one locked door that could stop a ceremony worth millions? But what this man didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that the woman everyone ignored had seen something hours earlier that morning. Something she wasn't meant to hear. Something that revealed the wedding itself was part of a carefully planned betrayal. And in just a few minutes, one choice, to listen or not to listen, would decide whether he walked down the aisle or straight into a trap. In this story, you'll see how silence can be dangerous, how power can be blinding, and how the truth often comes from the most unexpected voice in the room. You'll witness a wedding stopped in front of hundreds of guests, a lie exposed in real time, and a life saved, not by money or influence, but by courage. So if you enjoy powerful stories, unexpected heroes, and moments that make you question everything you think you know, make sure you subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay with us. Because what happened behind that door, no one saw coming. The morning sun spilled softly through the tall glass windows of the mansion, casting long, golden reflections across marble floors polished to perfection. Everything about the house felt deliberate, measured, controlled, flawless. It was the kind of place where mistakes didn't happen, where silence carried weight, where every detail existed to impress. Today was no different. In less than an hour, the billionaire would be married. He stood alone in his private suite, adjusting the cuff of his tailored suit, staring at his reflection as if trying to convince himself that this moment was real. To the outside world, he was a man who had everything: money, power, influence. A self-made empire that newspapers loved to admire. But behind closed doors, this wedding meant something far more personal. It was proof he had finally moved on. Years earlier, he had loved once before, deeply, and it had cost him everything. Betrayal had hardened him, taught him to trust contracts more than people. This wedding wasn't just about love, it was about closure. About starting fresh. About believing again. Downstairs, the mansion was alive with quiet chaos. Staff moved with rehearsed precision. Florists adjusted arrangements worth more than most people's annual salaries. Security checked and rechecked every corridor. Guests whispered excitedly, sipping champagne, unaware that anything could be wrong. And then there was her. The maid pushed a cleaning cart slowly down the hallway, her footsteps barely audible against the marble floor. She had worked in this house for 3 years. 3 years of being unseen. 3 years of learning how to disappear in plain sight. She knew which doors were never opened, which rooms were off-limits, and which conversations stopped the moment she entered. She wasn't supposed to be important today. Yet as she wiped a glass table near the east wing, she glanced toward a door at the end of the hallway, a door that had been locked since early morning. Something about it unsettled her. Not because it was forbidden, but because of what she had heard earlier while standing just out of sight. Raised voices. A tense whisper. A name spoken with urgency. She tried to shake it off. Today was not her place to question anything. Today was about the wedding. About happiness. About keeping her head down and doing her job. But the feeling didn't leave. Upstairs, the billionaire took a deep breath as his phone buzzed with congratulations. Messages poured in. Investors. Friends. People who believed they knew him. None of them knew what this moment truly meant, or how fragile it actually was. As the music downstairs began to cue, the maid stood frozen in the hallway, staring at that locked door. She didn't know it yet. But in just a few minutes, that door would decide everything. The mansion hummed with anticipation. Every guest had arrived. Every flower, every ribbon, every gilded chair was in place. It was a perfect stage for a wedding designed to impress, But perfection, as the maid knew, often masked something far darker. Candace had been working quietly for years, cleaning, serving, observing. She moved through the hallways like a shadow, unseen, unheard. But this morning, her instinct screamed. Something was wrong. 2 hours before the ceremony, she had been tidying the east wing when she overheard voices behind a partially closed door. The words were in a language she barely understood, fragments of Mandarin, a language her late brother had studied. Her pulse quickened as she recognized the pattern: scheming, manipulation, deceit. She pressed herself against the wall, barely daring to breathe, listening to the plan unfold. By the time she realized the stakes, it was too late to ignore it. Her hands trembled as she recalled the fate of her brother, Jerome. Once a rising accountant with a bright future, he had been destroyed by someone he trusted. Identity stolen, fortune gone, reputation ruined. And when the authorities turned a blind eye, Jerome had walked into his garage one November morning and never walked out again. Candace had found him hours later, and the memory had haunted her ever since. She had sworn she would never be silent again. Now, as she stared at the locked door in the hallway, the same instinct flared. Something was about to happen, something dangerous. And only she knew the truth. Moments later, the billionaire, Carlos Thompson, descended the grand staircase, perfectly groomed, radiating confidence. To everyone else, he was untouchable. To Candace, he was the next target. She watched him carefully, noting the way his eyes scanned the room, trusting, unsuspecting. A man who had built an empire from nothing, who had survived betrayal before, but who was completely unaware of the danger lurking just minutes from the ceremony. Her heart hammered. She had rehearsed this moment over and over in her mind. How would she tell him? How could she be sure he would believe her? She was nothing to him, just a maid, invisible, powerless, but armed with knowledge that could prevent disaster. Taking a deep breath, she stepped toward him, her voice shaking despite the resolve in her heart. "Sir, you need to listen. I know you don't know me, and I have no reason to be here, but you have to trust me. Don't open that door." Carlos froze mid-step, startled. He looked at her, confusion flickering across his face. "Excuse me," he asked, his tone polite but firm. Candace's eyes met his, unwavering. "There's something behind that door. Something you don't expect. Something dangerous. You need to hide, to see for yourself, before it's too late." For a moment, Carlos's world slowed. His instincts told him this was absurd. A maid, warning him? This was preposterous. Yet, something in her voice, in the gravity of her expression, hinted at truth. Something in her eyes was not seeking reward, not seeking recognition. It was desperation, memory, and determination. Time stretched. The wedding music began in the distance, the guests would be seated soon, and a decision had to be made. Every second that passed increased the stakes. Candace knew the moment was fleeting. She had one chance to save him. One chance to prevent another life from being destroyed. And Carlos, standing there, realized that the choice he made in the next heartbeat could change everything. Carlos Thompson's gaze flicked from the maid to the locked door at the end of the hallway. Every instinct in his body screamed caution. Billion-dollar instincts. Boardroom-tested instincts. Yet something in her voice, the raw, unpolished certainty, gnawed at him. Candace took another step closer, hands trembling, but her voice steady. "Sir, you've built an empire from nothing. You know what it's like to trust your instincts. Right now, your instinct needs to override your disbelief." He swallowed hard. The room suddenly felt smaller. The walls, the ceiling, even the polished floors seemed to press in. For the first time in years, the man who had conquered fear and failure felt exposed, vulnerable in a way that no negotiation, no stock deal, no legal contract had ever achieved. "Why are you telling me this?" Carlos asked cautiously. His voice was low, controlled, but underneath it, a flicker of curiosity, of tension, betrayed him. "Because if I don't, someone will get hurt," Candace replied, her voice catching just slightly. 5 years ago, my brother trusted someone just like her. He lost everything, and I couldn't stop it. I won't make that mistake again. You have to see for yourself." Carlos's eyes narrowed. His mind raced. 1,000 questions collided. Who was she? How could she possibly know? Was this some elaborate scam, a trap within a trap? But then he remembered the countless times his instincts had guided him correctly, the gut feelings that had saved him from bad deals, bad partners, bad investments. He had learned to trust them. Maybe, just maybe, this was one of those moments. He took a deep breath, walking slowly toward the door. Candace followed silently, her heart pounding, rehearsing the words she would say if he hesitated. Every step was weighted with consequence. One misstep could mean ruin, not just for Carlos, but for anyone else who might fall into the same trap. Reaching the door, Carlos hesitated. The polished brass handle gleamed under the morning light. His hand hovered over it. Candace's eyes met his, unwavering. Do it. Look. Trust me. The seconds stretched. Outside, the wedding preparations continued unaware, music floating faintly through the halls. Inside, the mansion held its breath. Finally, Carlos gritted his teeth and turned the handle. The door swung open with a soft creak. And for the first time in decades, Carlos Thompson felt the weight of true uncertainty, raw, unfiltered, undeniable. Inside, the room was empty. At first glance. But as his eyes adjusted to the shadows, he saw the evidence. Files. Photographs. Hidden accounts. Proof of a betrayal designed to ruin him. His heart raced, chest tightening. The realization hit like a freight train. The wedding was a lie, the love he believed in a fabrication, the person he trusted most had been deceiving him all along. Candace stepped forward, her voice calm but insistent. It's real, sir. You need to act. Now. Carlos's mind spun, recalling his mother's words from decades ago. Poverty is a circumstance, not a destiny. But this wasn't poverty. This was betrayal at the highest level, cunningly disguised. Every skill, every lesson he had learned in life pointed him in one direction. He had to stop this before it was too late. And in that moment, the billionaire realized, the next move he made would decide everything, not just for himself, but for the legacy he had spent a lifetime building. He glanced at Candace. Show me everything. Her nod was firm. They had crossed the point of no return. Outside the door, time continued. Somewhere, the bride prepared for a ceremony she thought would go unnoticed. But Carlos Thompson, guided by courage and instinct, was about to turn the entire wedding, and every life it touched, upside down. Carlos Thompson stepped into the room, each movement deliberate, eyes scanning every corner. Files were strewn across the mahogany desk, folders stacked neatly with meticulous precision, photographs of himself, his properties, his assets, all annotated in what looked like someone's painstakingly detailed plan. He felt a chill crawl up his spine. This was no ordinary theft. This was professional, calculated, and deeply personal. Candace followed silently, her expression unreadable, though her heart raced. This is everything, she said softly. Every bank account. Every property. Every trust. Every shell company. They've mapped your life down to the last detail. Carlos crouched to examine a folder labeled Cayman Transfers, flipping it open to reveal spreadsheets, transaction logs, and diagrams illustrating money flowing through a network of shell companies. He swallowed hard. Every number, every account, every note, proof of a web of deceit spun with cold precision. They plan to have it all finalized the day of your wedding, Candace explained, her voice calm but edged with urgency. Once the ceremony was official, all legal rights to your assets would have been transferred. And you would have been implicated without ever seeing it coming. Carlos felt a wave of disbelief, anger, and fear crash over him simultaneously. 2 years of trust, of love, of believing he had found someone who truly cared, erased in a single revelation. And the woman, he asked, voice low. The one I was marrying? Candace's gaze hardened. She doesn't exist, sir. Not the person you think she is. The woman you've loved. Amada Palmer is a role, a mask. Her real name is Sandra Mitchell. She's been running this same scheme on wealthy men for over a decade. Carlos sank into a chair, head in his hands, the weight of betrayal pressing down on him. He thought of every dinner, every conversation, every tender moment he had shared with her, now twisted into a performance designed to disarm him, to manipulate him. 2 years of his life, stolen. And David, Candace continued, the man you saw visiting her? He's her husband and partner in the con. Together, they've defrauded 12 men of millions. And now, they had you on the list. Carlos's chest tightened. He pictured the wedding, the cameras, the guests, the altar. How close had he come to walking blindly into a trap? The enormity of the situation pressed on him. This was more than heartbreak. This was a potential disaster that could destroy everything he had built, his reputation, his charitable foundation, his legacy. Candace's voice softened. I saw this pattern before. My brother, Jerome, he was a victim of the same strategy. I couldn't save him. But I won't let it happen to you. Carlos looked up at her, the realization dawning. This maid, invisible to the world, had risked everything to save him. No wealth, no power, no expectation of reward, just courage, intuition, and a refusal to remain silent. He exhaled slowly, the room heavy with tension. Outside, the wedding preparations continued, oblivious to the disaster that had been narrowly avoided. But in that moment, Carlos understood the truth. It wasn't just about catching the con. It was about integrity, vigilance, and listening to the people no one else notices, the ones in the shadows who see everything. Candace stepped back, letting him absorb the enormity. The wedding starts in less than 2 hours, she reminded him. What you do next will decide everything. But now you know the truth. Carlos's eyes hardened. Determination replaced shock. He would not be a victim. Not today. Not ever again. Carlos Thompson's reflection stared back at him from the gilded mirror of his suite. His hands gripped the edge of the marble counter, knuckles white. The man in the mirror, the billionaire, the self-made titan who had navigated every storm life had thrown at him, was about to confront the greatest betrayal of his life. 2 years of love, of trust, of believing he had found someone real, shattered in the span of a heartbeat. Candace stepped quietly into the room, carrying the last pieces of evidence, photographs, documents, phone records. They are ready, she said, her voice steady. When you go out there, you have everything you need. But remember, she's trained. She'll fight, manipulate, charm. You need to stay focused. Carlos exhaled, swallowing the knot of anger and disbelief in his throat. I trusted her, he whispered. I believed in her. And she's not real. Candace's eyes softened. And that's why you need to act. Not out of revenge, not out of spite. You act because the truth must be known. Because no one else can stop this, Carlos. Only you. The grand ballroom waited, unaware. 500 guests, cameras positioned at every angle, a string quartet tuning softly. Outside, the air carried the scent of fresh roses, silk dresses, and the quiet hum of anticipation. It would have been the wedding of the year. The spectacle of love, wealth, and prestige, but now, it would become the stage for justice. Carlos squared his shoulders, stepping into the corridor. Each step echoed with purpose. Candace followed closely, her presence a silent reassurance. The closer he came to the ballroom, the faster his pulse raced. Memories of the past 2 years played across his mind. The dinners, the laughter, the intimate conversations he had believed were genuine. Every moment now felt like a carefully rehearsed performance. And then she appeared. Amada Palmer. Sandra Mitchell. Radiant in a silk gown, hair perfect, makeup flawless. Every movement poised, every smile calculated, eyes shimmering with a practiced warmth. The woman he thought he knew, the love of his life, was an illusion. Carlos stopped a few feet away, raising his voice just enough for the nearest guests to hear. Before we continue, he said, his tone calm but commanding, I have a question for the bride. A ripple of confusion spread through the guests. Cameras swiveled, whispers rose. Sandra's smile faltered, imperceptibly at first. Carlos, what? She began, but he cut her off. Who is David? And who is the child named Sophie? His voice was quiet, precise, every word measured, but it carried through the hall with undeniable authority. Because I have seen everything. I was in your car this morning. I heard your conversations. I saw your plans. The lies, the schemes, the deception, it ends now. Gasps erupted. Cameras zoomed in. Sandra's composure cracked, just slightly, the first sign of vulnerability she had shown in 2 years. Carlos held up the evidence Candace had given him, photographs of her with David, documents detailing shell accounts, transfers, and secrets meant to entrap him. For the first time, the predator met the force of someone she could not manipulate. The room held its breath. The truth, raw and undeniable, radiated from Carlos's stance, from the silent presence of Candace, from the weight of justice that had finally arrived. And in that moment, 2 years of deceit collapsed under the power of courage, vigilance, and unwavering integrity. 1728, the 2nd of August 2026, YQB man dark-skin tone emoji modify #personal computer. Carlos Thompson's reflection stared back at him from the gilded mirror of his suite. His hands gripped the edge of the marble counter, knuckles white. The man in the mirror, the billionaire, the self-made titan who had navigated every storm life had thrown at him, was about to confront the greatest betrayal of his life. 2 years of love, of trust, of believing he had found someone real, shattered in the span of a heartbeat. Candace stepped quietly into the room, carrying the last pieces of evidence, photographs, documents, phone records. "They are ready," she said, her voice steady. "When you go out there, you have everything you need. But remember, she's trained. She'll fight, manipulate, charm. You need to stay focused." Carlos exhaled, swallowing the knot of anger and disbelief in his throat. "I trusted her," he whispered. "I believed in her. And she's not real." Candace's eyes softened. "And that's why you need to act. Not out of revenge, not out of spite. You act because the truth must be known. Because no one else can stop this, Carlos. Only you." The grand ballroom waited, unaware. 500 guests, cameras positioned at every angle, a string quartet tuning softly. Outside, the air carried the scent of fresh roses, silk dresses, and the quiet hum of anticipation. It would have been the wedding of the year. The spectacle of love, wealth, and prestige, but now, it would become the stage for justice. Carlos squared his shoulders, stepping into the corridor. Each step echoed with purpose. Candace followed closely, her presence a silent reassurance. The closer he came to the ballroom, the faster his pulse raced. Memories of the past 2 years played across his mind. The dinners, the laughter, the intimate conversations he had believed were genuine. Every moment now felt like a carefully rehearsed performance. And then she appeared. Amoda Palmer. Sandra Mitchell. Radiant in a silk gown, hair perfect, makeup flawless. Every movement poised, every smile calculated, eyes shimmering with a practiced warmth. The woman he thought he knew, the love of his life, was an illusion. Carlos stopped a few feet away, raising his voice just enough for the nearest guests to hear. "Before we continue," he said, his tone calm but commanding, "I have a question for the bride." A ripple of confusion spread through the guests. Cameras swiveled, whispers rose. Sandra's smile faltered, imperceptibly at first. "Carlos, what?" she began, but he cut her off. "Who is David? And who is the child named Sophie?" His voice was quiet, precise, every word measured, but it carried through the hall with undeniable authority. "Because I have seen everything. I was in your car this morning. I heard your conversations. I saw your plans. The lies, the schemes, the deception, it ends now." Gasps erupted. Cameras zoomed in. Sandra's composure cracked, just slightly, the first sign of vulnerability she had shown in 2 years. Carlos held up the evidence Candace had given him, photographs of her with David, documents detailing shell accounts, transfers, and secrets meant to entrap him. For the first time, the predator met the force of someone she could not manipulate. The room held its breath. The truth, raw and undeniable, radiated from Carlos's stance, from the silent presence of Candace, from the weight of justice that had finally arrived. And in that moment, 2 years of deceit collapsed under the power of courage, vigilance, and unwavering integrity. 1733, the 2nd of August 2026, YQB man dark-skin tone emoji modify #personal computer. The grand ballroom, once poised for a celebration of wealth and love, had transformed into a stage for truth. Sandra Mitchell, the woman Carlos had thought was the love of his life, now sat handcuffed, escorted away by the FBI agents positioned discreetly among the guests. Her husband and accomplice, David, had already been taken into custody, his confident posture replaced by the stark realization that their carefully orchestrated scheme had unraveled. Carlos Thompson stood at the altar, his hands steady, his chest heavy with the weight of betrayal but also the clarity of justice. He looked out at the audience, 500 guests, cameras capturing every detail, whispers of shock and disbelief filling the air. He had been ready to marry, to celebrate, to believe in love again. Instead, he had been handed something far more important, the truth. Candace Williams approached, quiet but resolute. Her eyes met Carlos's, and in that single look, years of pain, vigilance, and courage spoke volumes. She had seen the patterns, learned the tactics, and risked everything to prevent him from becoming another victim. Carlos nodded to her, silently acknowledging that without her bravery, none of this would have been possible. "It's over," he said softly, voice steady, though tinged with lingering emotion. "Thanks to you." Candace simply nodded, a small, proud smile touching her lips. She had turned invisibility into power, quiet observation into decisive action. She had done what so many others could not, or would not. In the weeks that followed, investigations confirmed the depth of Sandra and David's crimes. Carlos's charitable foundation, once threatened, was cleared of any wrongdoing, and the stolen assets were secured. Candace testified in federal court, recounting the pattern of deception, sharing the story of her brother Jerome, and demonstrating the vigilance and courage required to expose such a network. Her testimony ensured justice, not just for Carlos, but for every victim caught in the web of these professional con artists. Carlos, now free from the shadow of deception, reflected on the lessons of this ordeal. Love could be a powerful illusion. Trust, even for the strongest, could be weaponized. And yet, there were those whose integrity and courage could shine a light into the darkest of schemes, even when the world turned a blind eye. And that is the story I wanted to share with you today, a story of deception, courage, and the unexpected heroes who make all the difference. It reminds us that sometimes, the people who see the truth most clearly are the ones no one notices, the ones standing quietly in the background, waiting for the courage to act. Thank you so much for watching until the very end. I truly appreciate you being here, joining me on this journey. If this story moved you, inspired you, or left you on the edge of your seat, please make sure to subscribe so you never miss our stories. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this, share it with someone who loves suspense and true-life dramas, and drop a comment below telling me what country you're watching from today. I love seeing how far our stories reach. Remember, your voice matters, your courage matters, and sometimes, the truth comes from the places you least expect. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay inspired, and never underestimate the power of one person standing up for what is right.